right, switching over to the world of soccer. Did I mention that a lot of really important things happened this weekend? The United States women's national team is the inaugural CONCACAF W Gold Cup winner, completing the bounce back from the surprising loss to Mexico at the end of the group stage. They rattle off 3 straight wins. One was a penalty kick advancement, I guess, against Canada in the semifinal. We're going to talk big picture on this because, in my opinion, to be completely honest, the semifinal and this final, the games themselves were only okay. The semifinal was incredibly dramatic. It was the most beautiful theater you could possibly imagine, but it was simply not a very good soccer game that probably should not have been played because it was played in a torrential downpour in San Diego. The ball was not moving, players were not moving, and yet there were 4 goals in this game, which is pretty incredible. 2 from the United States, 2 from Canada. Alyssa Nair proves her worth as a shot stopper once again. I think I talked about this with the Colombia game. You got to talk about everything but the soccer in this one. Mentality, leadership, tenacity, bravery. You had to be really brave to play that game. I think there's a lot of criticism to be held for CONCACAF for forcing that game through in those weather conditions. And then they play Brazil in the final. Also, just, it was fine. I think things get tighter at the end of a tournament. It's a lot of playing not to lose, and then maybe when you take your chances, you will win. The U.S. definitely reacted to the Mexico loss by putting together a little bit more of a conservative game plan once again. And I am now at this point, I think we saw some really good roster evaluation in this tournament, and we'll get into that in a second. But in terms of formation and style of play, this interim manager period, I just don't think at this point is going to be particularly fruitful in that way. I kept finding myself, this is nothing against Twyla Kilgore, who I've always said I think was put in a tricky position and has done everything asked of her up until this point, including winning this tournament. But when the lineups come out or the formation is set, if there are things that I want to critique or things that I don't think are quite right, I go, well, who made this? Was it Kilgore? Was it Emma Hayes? It's hard to tell based on the communication there, just how much the particulars of the way the team is playing right now will carry into the rest of the year. But also this is maybe just reflective of the bind that the US is currently in, which is that they simply don't have time to make grand sweeping changes in formation and style of play before the Olympics. But I do want to talk about kind of what those frustrations were in this Brazil game so people can maybe get a sense of where the team is at right now and the questions going into the She Believes Cup, and then also when Hayes takes over in June. This lineup against Brazil, standard 4-2-3-1. I think there were shades in this tournament, and certainly shades at the end of 2023 of the U.S. moving away. They were clinging very much to that Sweden game at the end of the World Cup, the one that famously they did not in fact win, but they did play much better in, kind of with that double pivot defensive midfield, really being sturdy up the spine, feeling like they had more control over the game. The Kilgore era will probably be defined in tactic, in that just, we liked the Sweden game, we're going to keep building off of that. And we're, even in this tournament, as we put new players through and do this roster evaluation, we're going to stick with that. But that created against Brazil its own lineup imbalances that I certainly hope are not being seriously considered for the future, to be honest. For example, this starting lineup was kind of fill one hole, but then you create another one where you plug one player in and then that player forces another player out of position, which forces another player out of position. I think some of the main ones that I think people noticed were we still saw Corbin Albert at defensive midfielder alongside Sam Coffey. Albert had a great tournament. Stashing her at the number 6 still feels vaguely like some of the experimentation we saw Andonovski do in the last couple of years in an attempt to replace Julie Ertz. Certainly would rather see Albert and Coffey in those situations than just slotting in Emily Sonnet, so did like that move. But again, still question of what's the permanent solution here. That puts Lindsay Horan at the number 10, which is in a different form, right? You've got Coffey and Albert. It's not Sonnet and Sullivan, but it's still that hyper-conservative midfield of ball winning. Horan is the most forward playing midfielder. Nothing against Lindsay Horan, who I think did very sturdy work throughout this whole tournament, but this is not a hyper-creative trio. This is about maintaining, I think, sturdiness off the ball, to be honest. And I think we saw that again in this game where the U.S. did not really retain possession that much. And then I assume this was for rest. I don't know for sure. They rest Jaden Shaw to play Rose Lavelle. Now, in a vacuum, I like this. I like the idea that Jaden Shaw and Rose Lavelle right now are kind of in this alternate state. I think it's good to have backup plans. Certainly, they're going to want to go into the Olympics with an A1 starting 11, perhaps with Lavelle and Shaw on the field at the same time. But right now, understanding that both players are probably on limited minutes, considering where they are in their preseason and the fact that this was just a very grueling tournament, I'm fine with a rotation between Jaden Shaw and Rose Lavelle. I think they both actually have very similar qualities as players, certainly in their playmaking abilities, their abilities to manipulate space and to move the ball. But I don't understand why that alternate is happening on the left wing. Shaw did admirably with that, but she's played more winger than Lavelle has. Lavelle, I think, famously played a little bit when she was in Manchester City, and I don't think anybody really liked that much. And so it's like this one identification I agree with, that we have Shaw and Lavelle. They're both really talented. They're both really creative, good alternates to have, but they're being shoved into a corner, essentially. Shaw does better with it than Lavelle does, because Lavelle, that's just not where she plays, which I also think is interesting, because I think whenever you see a player's versatility start being tested, I think that's also something to watch going into an Olympic roster. If you have a player that has typically been considered a one position specialist where their versatility is suddenly getting tested, I also go a little bit like, that's interesting to me. This could be purely about system, but maybe they feel at this moment that they need to see more from a particular player in different parts of the field, rather than feeling confident that they need to fill only just one role. No one is saying that Rose Lavelle is a great winger, and I'm not sure that Twyla Kilgore would say that either, but I think it was a function of the midfield behind her. And it basically just was a strange use of Rose Lavelle for 45 minutes. She was pretty much on an island. She wasn't really even able to help defensively that much, was not involved in the attack. It felt very much like she was in a position of the field where she didn't feel particularly comfortable. And it was a sacrifice made to make Haran the 10 with a double pivot behind Haran. And I don't know if I necessarily agree that midfield is so dominating that other concessions need to be made to create that comfort level in the middle of the pitch, because the U.S. did not dominate the midfield. They did not have the run of possession. They didn't even really do an incredible job of, well, I want to be careful about this. There were some really nice turnovers created in this game, and I think I mentioned in the Colombia game how important that is for the way that the U.S. is playing right now. But it wasn't happening consistently. I actually think Brazil's defense, for the most part, did a really nice job on the ball. So if you're going to play four midfielders, why not just play in a four midfield formation? Why not just play in a 4-4-2? Alex Morgan can drift into different spaces, push her slightly to the left, have Trinity Rodman slightly to the right, get these midfielders in the mix in a way where they can actually start creating passing triangles and hold the ball. Again, this is just on the basis of the idea that that's what the U.S. wants to do, because they keep telling us that that's what they want to do. But instead, we just got this sort of strangely imbalanced, kind of misshapen domino effect, essentially. And yet it all worked out fine. The U.S. wins the game. And for all of my complaining, defensively it did work. It was a very bend don't break. The U.S. was very organized off of the ball. They didn't see it as much, but I think we saw Tiana Davison and Naomi Girma do very, very well in the central defense. The help defense in the defensive midfield is working. I think Emily Fox's role is very interesting at this moment, because it does feel like she is also doing a lot of midfield work, which, again, why not just play four midfielders? But I'm not the coach. So Trinity Rodman had to come back and do a lot of defensive work, and I think it's a great sign that these players are doing that. This was true for the Andonovski era as well. If this is the assignment, you want to see these players getting stuck in and handling things. Brazil was mostly... They had to take shots from distance. To be honest, Alyssa Nair was not really tested that much. Many shots went wide, and so defensively, this was a performance we're used to seeing. And again, considering that this was the final of a very physically taxing tournament, that's fine, right? That's what you do to win the game. A very nice header by Haran to put the team ahead. Maybe she is the number 10. Maybe she's the number 9. No, I'm kidding. She's very good in the air. Always has been. Very, very nice ball from Emily Fox to find her. So US walks away from this with the win. Some lessons learned for sure. A lot of roster evaluation. So real quick, I think I just want to hit big picture, just some of the standout players I thought I saw for the US over the course of the tournament. Taking the coaching out of it, because like I said, I think at this point, the team is just kind of stuck in this interim situation that I'm beginning to be ready to be done with, I think. So tournament winners to me, I think, have to look obviously at Jaden Shaw, breakout star of the tournament. She won the tournament golden ball, which was for player of the tournament. Huge spark for the United States. But I just can't think of any greater compliment. I think people were responding to where Lavelle was possibly going to be playing, but I genuinely cannot think of any greater compliment for Jaden Shaw than the fact that United States women's national team fans had conflicted feelings about her being rested in favor of Rose Lavelle. That's good. That's the good kind of competition you want within this team, where you have a young player playing that well in such good form, making such an impact that they get rested for someone like Lavelle. And that is a point of conversation. Now, like I said, I don't love where it was, but I think that huge compliment to Shaw, certainly in the mix. I think Tierna Davidson had a really good bounce back tournament. If you look at the arc of her recent years, she was put in a tough position. Once again, I kind of buy that Mexico game. We'll get into sort of players that I don't know where they stand at this moment, but the US ran with the Davidson Germa center back duo for 3 games straight. Davidson had her moments. She did have that one kind of big bailout moment where VAR didn't take a look at a possible penalty against Canada. But if you just thought about, positioning and calm in the back line with the two of them, I was very, very impressed by that, especially because Davidson really wasn't with the team for most of 2023. So really nice bounce back tournament from her. Some of the new younger players, Corbin Albert, Jenna Neiswanger. I think you could put Olivia Moultrie in there too. They moved away from her a little bit more as the games got harder. These are players proving their versatility and proving their willingness to do the nitty-gritty work. And I think it's kind of thankless because I don't think these experiences always necessarily turn into a major tournament roster right away, especially, like I said, when I'm not sure the coaching principles are as sound as they need to be. But Neiswanger, newly converted left back, did really nicely. Albert, very much relied on, I think, for fitness. She's in the middle of her club season. I think that she just, in many ways, just sort of put the team on her back by being willing to play this many minutes, being so new to the team. Looked very confident. Trinity Rodman, I thought, had a great tournament. She's another player that really got thrown into that starting role at the World Cup last year in a way that I don't think she was expecting and wasn't necessarily fair. And I think the growth that you can see for a player like Rodman, just in confidence in owning her space on the field, was very cool to see. And then I think the obvious ones are obviously, I keep saying obvious because they're obvious, Alyssa Nair and Alex Morgan. Very strong tournaments from them, which we got into in detail last week. So I'll leave that. Players that maybe are walking away not feeling quite so great. Abby Dahlkemper and Becky Sauerbrunn. I was a little bit surprised by not seeing them at all after the Mexico game. That was the center back pairing that did not work so well against Mexico. I would have thought that we would have seen Dahlkemper with Germa at some point, just because they have that club connection. And that would be an evaluation point for me just to check in. But I was a little bit surprised to see neither of them make an appearance. I'm sure that there's some feedback there going into their club seasons. Sophia Smith was considered to be relief for Alex Morgan in this tournament in the knockout stages rather than someone that the team was putting out first. I don't think this is good news. I don't think this is what the team wants. I think the U.S. is at their best when Sophia Smith feels the most comfortable. And obviously Alex Morgan was playing very well, but this is, I think, a point of interest as well going forward, which is how does the team continue to empower Sophia Smith, and how does Smith continue to progress in a system that isn't always placing her on the field exactly where she is most comfortable. And then also just some of the reserves that maybe got less time than it felt like they should. I think the backup goalkeepers have to feel like this was a great tournament for Alyssa Nair, which I'm sure they're very happy about, but it says interesting things about where that rotation is as Nair gets a little bit older. Players like, Midge Purse, Casey Kruger, players that I think probably could have helped more with more time on the field. Lynn Williams. Those are all players that you're always wondering kind of why they're not getting as many starting looks as some of their teammates. Hard to say, but yeah, interesting for them probably as they have some things to work on as well going into their club seasons. I think like last week, measured praise for the United States. They got the job done. I think they would have been really disappointed not to win this tournament with how many factors were in their favor, not least the fact that they hosted it. Really cool tournament to watch. Excited for Brazil, Mexico, Canada. some of the smaller nations that we saw in the group stage and in the quarterfinals. Really enjoyed it. Good for the U.S. Lots to think about. They'll reconvene in early April for the She Believes Cup.